So here goes video time. I haven't made one in quite a while, and I don't know, as a matter of explaining some of the Facebook posts I made in the last month or so, I thought I would make one. Originally, the idea was to go through each Facebook post and basically explain or elaborate on what I've said or what I've written. Essentially speaking, the comments I make on Facebook are maybe intentionally. I don't know yet. It's a little bit of a trick I'm playing with myself and probably with people who do read this stuff. It's they can be sometimes open-ended, or even leaving, just if not open-ended, leaving a lot of wiggle room for interpretation. So that was my original idea, to sort of do that, but I decided not to, because I think there's something. I think there was one post that was more poignant, and I think. I don't know if it deserves an explanation, but I know that I'd like to kind of elaborate on it. As you know, I've always been very interested in words and definitions and things like that, because I think that's what kind of what basically builds concepts in people and even opinions in people's heads, defining the words. And this is sort of in response to a National Post article about Trump's national security advisor picks. Apparently they've called Islam toxic and a cancer and things like that. So this is going to get into very kind of iffy territory with the words, because, as I've explained, because a lot of times when certain groups talk about certain things, they have these kind of, I want to say, broad stroke definitions of what they're talking about, but I don't know if it's broad stroke as much as it is lumping in a whole bunch of definitions into one word, or at least having one word give off this air of inclusivity and kind of referring to a whole bunch of things that aren't really necessarily what the word is referring to. So Islamophobia being sort of the umbrella one that's coming up more and more, especially now that there's a Trump presidency, or he is the president-elect, and assuming he will take office in January 20th, he's probably going to make some sweeping changes, or at least introduce legislation that would see Muslims targeted in some form or the other. Now, calling Islam toxic or a cancer, you have to wonder, on the Christian right, or on the side of Trump's electorate, what are they referring to? Are they referring to Muslims, like all Muslims? I mean, are they referring to the doctrine? Are they referring to Islam as a practiced religion? Are they referring to extremism or hyper-extremism? What are they referring to? And I think the definitions of these terms are going to have to really boil themselves down. I'm not sure that they will, in accordance with new policy that might be introduced, but I'm just saying anyone would want to have to define this. Now, the problem being is once you get into this sort of Christian right backlash against extremism, or you end up with this adversarial sort of construct where it's Christianity against Islam, you end up with these lumping of groups, so Christians versus Muslims, and it's not the healthiest way to go. Essentially what you will end up with is this sort of bigoted and overly sensitized position when it comes to Islam. And going back to Islamophobia, it's sort of this term that takes into account people who are critical of the religion, not so much Muslims, but critical of the doctrine or Islamic faith, and kind of labels them as Islamophobes, which is not the best way about going about things. Essentially, because you're lumping terms together, what you're creating is us against them, or Christians against Muslims, etc., and you leave room for a lot of bigotry and a lot of xenophobia. These terms, and there's a motion in Parliament right now in Canada addressing the problem of Islamophobia. But even up to this point, there hasn't been a clear definition of what Islamophobia entails. if legislation is introduced to curb that quote-unquote problem, you end up with, well, what exactly is Islamophobia? So you end up with, like I said before, this lumping together of terms that just kind of create this broad stroke understanding of what Islam is and what Christianity is and how that works. But critical thought or critical thinking when it comes to any religion is not, it should not be something that should be suppressed or rooted out of society. I mean, ideas need to be criticized. We do it with politics all the time. And of course there are, drill down sort of relationships when it comes to race and religion and ethnicity and religion and country of origin and religion. So these things do matter. It's not like they don't, but the criticism of an idea, just as you can have a political idea, is very healthy in a democratic society. Or at least one that carefully thinks about the steps it takes in terms of dealing with a diverse population. So it's important to not look at all Muslims as being extremists or being somehow cancerous or toxic to society. I mean, that's just wrong. But at the same time, religious doctrine needs to be criticized. I mean, even in the U.S., there are going to be problems when it comes to, issues surrounding Christianity and abortion, or Christianity and gay rights, or Christianity and, I'd go so far as to say climate change or climate change issues. So, it's not saying that it's just one true religion demonizing the other. It's there's problems with religion across the board, and all religions need to be criticized. Islam is sort of a hot topic these days because of what's going on in the Middle East. I'm sure that there's going to be a shift in power depending on what Trump does with relation to intervening in foreign policy issues, different messes in the Middle East, Turkey and Syria and things like that. Those things are going to change. So it's important to just keep in mind that you have to kind of not paint everyone with a broad stroke, and you kind of have to look at really defining what we mean by Islamophobia, or what we really mean by, bigotry or xenophobia and things like that. And there's tons written about it out there, so I'm sure that's gonna come into play. Anyway, I think I explained what I wanted to say, but I might have to leave it there. So yeah, anyway, that's about all. Bye.